Hey everyone, and welcome to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter, and joining me as always is Tim.
I'm your number one fan.
Of course you are. You're only human, Tim. You're only human. This is a horror movie podcast. We get together every week, we talk about horror movies, we watch a film, we talk about it. It's that simple. And this episode is going to be about Misery, the Stephen King adaptation, directed by Rob Reiner. This was actually the winner of one of our Patreon votes. Not the regular one. This is the premium Patreon vote, where two films for Screams After Midnight go up against two films from the Atomic Cinema Experiment, the sci-fi movie podcast that I do with Tara. And this is actually the first time that a Screams movie won the vote.
Oh,
you know, the last 2 months, because this is a relatively new thing. The last 2 months, Ace won the vote. You know, the movie, one of the movies won that from that options. Whereas this one, Misery won. So we're here to do this film as a result.
cool.
The theme for the vote was all Stephen King adaptations, so there was two sci-fi ones for that podcast and two horror ones for this. And
what
Misery,
were the sci-fi ones?
I can't remember.
Like Cell,
Not that.
Tommy Knockers, Dreamcatcher,
I think Dreamcatcher was one of them. That sounds right.
Maximum Overdrive.
Definitely Dreamcatchers. I think it was that, and maybe
Okay.
Dead Zone.
Oh, okay.
I think those were the sci-fi ones.
I wouldn't really call that sci-fi, but okay.
Well, luckily it didn't win then. Okay, we're here with Misery, starring James Caan as a horror author,
I
Kathy
think it's
Bates.
Caan, but okay.
What did I say?
Can.
It can.
Yeah, Caan. James Caan.
Con. Oh, I don't. It sounds the same in my accent. What do you want from me? I can't differentiate. Con, can,
There you go.
can. What am I saying? Like an O? Con?
It sounds like you're saying can, like a soda can, when it should be like Caan, like, you know, the Wrath of Caan.
The Wrath of Khan. Yeah, Wrath of Khan. I can't do it. My voice can't make the different, slightly different version of the word. Okay.
It's okay. it's fine.
Can. I'm just
Yeah.
drawing out the A.
But it's not so much an A sound though. It's more like it's not like A. It's like ah. So when you do like can, like soda can, it's like can and. When it's like got the two A's, it's like ah.
Can. Con.
Just like think it's like an O.
A con.
Yeah, there you go.
But that's what I'm saying. Con though, not can.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. We'll spend enough time. We'll spend enough time on the fact that I can't pronounce James Caan's name correctly. All right. So the premise of Misery. We'll start spoiler free, by the way. We'll give you a warning in the middle before we get to spoilers. But the movie and the book, of course, is about a horror author. Well, actually, no. Sorry, let me correct that. The author in the story is not a horror author. I'm confusing the fact that Stephen King, of course, who wrote it, is a horror author. The author in the movie is a successful author who's been writing this character called Misery. Misery Chastain, I think was the full name of the character. But he's a successful author. He's been writing these books about this character, and he's trying to move on to other things. And he finishes his novel. He always goes to this lodge to finish his novels. He's on his way back to deliver it to his publisher and his agent and all the rest of it. And he's caught in a blizzard. His car is flipped over, and Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates, his number one fan, rescues him, and he finds himself captive in her house with no way to call for help, no way to reach to the outside world. He can't walk. He's too injured from the crash, and he's basically at her mercy. And she is, obviously very, very complimentary to begin with, but turns out to maybe be a bit of a psycho fan who is very entitled and is also maybe psychotic. So that's kind of where the story goes. So this is Misery. I think what's interesting about watching this now is I've seen this once before. I saw this back on DVD back in the mid-2000s. And I think what's really funny about having watched it then and now watching it for the first time since now is that back when I watched this the last time, Twitter didn't exist. So social media didn't exist. And I
Yeah.
feel like this movie and this story is far more relevant, oddly, in a
Oh, totally.
post-Twitter and social media world than it was
Mhm.
before those things. Clearly, it was still a story worth telling at the time, but
Yeah.
there's a lot like what this movie kind of touches on feels like it's more of a thing now than it was at the time. So, uh,
It's yeah. I mean,
interesting.
yeah. It's all about like toxic fandom, which it's definitely something that has been around for a long time. And well, I mean, I think what's funny though is I mean, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like um one of the things Stephen King said is it's not so much about like fandom as it is supposed to be about like him dealing with his like addiction. Um, because he was like a person who did a lot of like booze and drugs and stuff for a long time, and um he I don't know if this was maybe around the time where he was trying to get like a sober maybe, but I think for like a long time he kind of felt like those things had a hold on him. um so that's kind of funny, because I think there's definitely a way you can look at it like that, but I think there's a much more like obvious way that we can look at it as being about toxic fandom. And yeah, that's something that's been around like for probably since as long as like popular media was a thing. But I think nowadays, like you said, with social media, it's so much more prevalent, and people have so much like closer access to their creators, and people feel so much emboldened and entitled to give like their correct opinions of how they feel
I
these characters should be treated. And
I am deadly serious. If you watch this movie and just replace the writer here, Sheldon,
Paul Sheldon,
Paul
yeah.
Sheldon, if you replace him with Ryan Johnson and think that it's
Oh,
about
sure.
Star Wars: The Last Jedi, the movie completely makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
It completely functions
Mhm.
as you would expect it to. Yeah. So that's the gist of the movie, and we'll obviously get into it. Yeah, Tim, what do you think of Misery?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm a big Stephen King fan. So, yeah, I'm a little.
Would you say you're his number one fan?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I absolutely love this. I think, I love King, but I do think, sometimes it is a little hard to adapt his stuff. But I think there are a couple people that do it really well, and I think Rob Reiner is one of them. Because I think this and Stand by Me are like two of the best like King adaptations out there. Um, Obviously, Flanagan and Darabont would be the other ones that I think just really are able to kind of hone in and get the essence of what King's trying to do. And but I think this is a phenomenal movie. It's it's almost kind of like a very like I don't want to say bottle movie, because they do go to like different places and stuff, but it is very confined to this like one space. And it's a very small cast, but these two Caan and Bates do such a good job. And like I really love their relationship. Like yeah, like I just love how exasperated like Paul Sheldon is all the time. And uh like I like how he's obviously always like trying to find ways out of it, but like there's so many times where he's just kind of like accepting his fate and just like like kind of like making quips and stuff to her, which is so funny. And I think this was like Bates' really like big first like big role, and I think she just nails it. Like she does such a good job of like being so unhinged and going from like a sweet like caring like, oh my god, I love you, I'm your biggest fan, to like as soon as he does something that she doesn't like, she is like going off the rails. And like it has that end of fandom where it's like as loving as someone can be, they can also be like the scariest, most hateful thing to you as well. And man, there's just like some really really good like tension throughout this movie. Like every little thing Paul Sheldon's trying to do to escape, because like becomes such a big obstacle. Like him bending down to pick up a hairpin, or like counting pills, and like all this stuff. Like it's such small stuff, but like in his state and like being trapped, it's just it makes everything feel like so tense, and you're just like holding your breath and like, oh, like please, I don't want you to be found out or whatever. And then there's like a couple like, yeah, well, I'd say there's one like scene in here that I just think is like an all-timer like classic horror scene that, you know, sure, anyone who's seen the movie knows you know what it is, but man, it's like so good and still gets me every time. So yeah, I think it's a phenomenal movie.
Oh, you're done. Oh.
Yeah.
just like Tim monologuing there for about 5 minutes. No, I like the movie. The movie is very confident in what it's doing. It's very solid. You're essentially anchored by two cast members. There's a kind of a third, I suppose fourth as well, technically, and the sheriff and his wife who are kind of looking into things, and that's kind of the only times we really cut away to anything in the outside world. Otherwise, because one of the things that it does is that we never actually get to see the rest of the house until Paul does. We never see outside of that room until Paul actually gets to see it himself. And it's just, that's a simple little technique, a little, you know, thematic technique where you just you everything's from his perspective. But that doesn't necessarily mean you literally shoot at POV. It just means that if he doesn't get to see something, or he doesn't get to hear something, or is aware of something, then we don't get to be aware of it either. And that kind of, you know, functions to a point. Obviously, the movie doesn't. If the movie, like, obviously was strictly adhering to that, then we wouldn't cut away to the sheriff. But that's kind of our dangling hope. That's like, oh, he's the one that we're hoping is going to find him, or it's going to realize that something's up, or whatever. Performances are very good. I think it almost relies almost entirely on them because it's so rooted in just these two actors and how they're playing off of each other. Obviously, the music's there and the cinematography's there, and those other things are there. If I'm going to be the negative voice here to critique things a little bit, I will say I do think, and this is just not me making a jab because it's Stephen King and it's easy to crack this joke, I do think the ending's a little lackluster, and that's something we can get into. There's a sense of catharsis that I think is a little bit missing from some of the end stuff, but we'll get into that when we go into the spoilers. Sure. But for the most part, though, I think one of the things you touched upon that I do agree with is probably the biggest strength of the movie. Aside from maybe the actual sort of commentary of fandom and the commentary of, like, you know, the actual, he's a writer, she's a fan, and all the actual plot stuff that comes out of that, is just the basic sort of, like, escape attempts and the survival elements where it's all very simple things, but because he cannot walk, because his legs are completely wrecked from the crash and he's in a wheelchair, even at the best of times he's in a wheelchair, before that he can't even move, like sit up without feeling pain. He's so helpless in a way that feels very simplistic, and that, you know, normally when you have characters in, like, you know, situations where they're being held captive or they're in a prison or something, like, there's all these really extreme measures to keep them feeling, like, confined, because otherwise, like, this is just a regular house and it's a bedroom in a house, and there's very simple things, and, you know, his mission's just to get to a phone, because if he can get to a phone he can call for help. It's really simple things. So when you present all these really simple obstacles as, like, almost impossible tasks because of his situation, because of how he is, and it's actually really on a personal level, there's kind of a weird relatability to that. Well, relatability is not the right word, but my father had MS, so he was in a wheelchair, so there's a lot of specific little things that kind of feel very true to life to me. Even such as something as simple as the bottle he pisses in is something I saw that growing up. I saw that little bottle thing hanging around the house. So seeing that, just the obstacles of, like, not being able to fit through one of the door frames at one point, or all these things. There's an odd kind of, like, difference to it. And this idea, and obviously there's the thematic narrative idea that he feels trapped because he was confined to this character, this successful property that he made. You know, he wrote this character called Misery, and obviously the title of the movie's got a double meaning, because obviously before you even watch the movie or read the book, or you know, on the other hand, you don't know that there's a character in the book that's the fictional character that this writer's been writing about. You see the word misery and you think, oh, it's because he's going to be miserable. It's because it's, you know, it's going to be this traumatic experience where misery is the theme.
Yeah.
So when you actually, see the movie and you see that it's about this character that he feels trapped by, there's a point later on when this toast to misery, and it's like, yeah, we're in our own misery, we're in our own head, we're trapped by our own creations. So even though it's really obvious to look at the film and say, oh, it's about fandom and all these things, in a lot of ways it is about that, but the actual metaphor of the film is it's more about how he feels trapped by this character that he's now expected to always write and expected to stick to. And we see it all the time with like writers and directors where they're expected to stick to a franchise or a character that they are associated with, and like, no, they want to go and do new things, they want to try different genres, they want to try different types of storytelling. But no, we expect, X director to stick to this movie franchise forever because that's what we expect of them. And, so Paul wants to, break out and do other things, but he is literally confined and imprisoned by someone who is a fan of this character. So he feels like he's imprisoned by that character. So again, it's that storytelling thing where you take, him feeling trapped by his own creation and you make it literal. He's literally, sure, Kathy Bates isn't called Misery. She has a pig called Misery, but she's not literally Misery, but she is literally trapping him because, hey, you're not doing the character I want, and so on. So, I mean, that's not why she actually kidnaps him in the first place, but it kind of becomes that in a lot of ways. So,
and what's kind of funny about that too is originally this was supposed to be a Bachman book, which Stephen King had a pseudonym that he wrote under for a while, Richard Bachman. That's like he did stuff like The Running Man, under that. And so this was actually supposed to be a Bachman book, but he ended up getting found out, and so it ended up coming out under his name. But it's kind of interesting in that context, like a movie about someone trying to escape their kind of like fame, what they're known for, and originally it was supposed to be under not the writer's less famous moniker.
Yeah, that must be a hard sell to publishers because they must be thinking to themselves, but we would sell so much more copies if your name was on the book. Like you have a reputation.
I'm sure like there's like I think the Bachman books like still did like okay, like they definitely weren't selling as good as King, but I'm sure like once that all got like revealed, there's probably like a big uptick in sales of those.
Yeah, just like how everyone started looking for Alan Smithy movies once people knew it was a fake name.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, we have to see this. All these Alan Smithy movies. Who's the real director behind these gems? Yeah. So no. I mean, that's basically my feelings on it. I think I do love a good bottle story, and like you say, it does cut away, but the main premise and the main character are kind of confined, and that's kind of the point, is that he feels confined, because so many bottle stories aren't necessarily about being confined to the place. That's just where the story takes place. This is actually about him wanting to get away, him wanting to break free and get anywhere else, but this becomes his world. This is where he is now, this is where he's living. It's where he's breathing. It's where he's doing everything now for his foreseeable future.
I think you bring up a good point where you say like, you don't see the rest of the house until he sees it. So like the audience is kind of feeling like you're trapped in there with him, which I think, it's kind of like part of the reason why you want to root for him so much, is because like, hey, like, we want to get out of here too. Like, so it's kind of cool how like, it takes you with him, like when he explores.
Yeah. So anything else you want to add, spoiler free, before we go further?
I mean, not really. I mean, again, I just I think it's really great. Very suspenseful. Great acting. Really enjoyable watch. Like, if you've never seen it before, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we're about to get spoilers then. Before we do so, I'll thank our Patreon producers at the time of recording, which is the start of September. So thank you to Alison M. Fordyce, Tyler Hess, Cindy Palisades, David Short, Born Now, Al Trousman, Christopher Moy, and Brett Williams. Thank you to all. They're all $20 or above patrons on the patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. But you can, of course, support us for as little as $1 per month. And for that $1, you get an exclusive extra episode of Screams After Midnight every single month. There's a back catalogue now of about 20 or so films. You get access to all of them for just that $1. You can find a whole bunch of weird things on there. The very first one we ever did was The Invisible Maniac, which may still be the best, quite frankly. Extremely entertaining. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So go and check out all that. You get bonuses for other shows, of course. At the $5 tier, you get voting rights on the main vote every month for Streams After Midnight. Although we do have a new vote in the $10 tier, which is called the Echoes by Morning vote, which is our $10 patrons get to help sort of pick some of the new VOD movies that we do. Because basically we want to try and do more classic movies, and we keep not having time because there's too many new films coming out. So we're helping patrons are helping us pick which ones we focus on. So go and have a look at all that stuff. And obviously $5 also gets you early access to episodes as well. So go and have a look and see if you're interested in all that. But anyway, yeah, so full spoilers for Misery from this point on. So I do like how Caan Collected the movie starts. It just starts with him, his typewriter, the bottle of wine waiting, or champagne even, as he's finishing this book that he's written, this personal book that he's written for him. He's doing something else, and it's a quiet introduction. What the ending of a book means to him, and even him like making a snowball and throwing it at a tree outside and saying he still got it. I think obviously there's subtext there about how he wanted to convince himself that he could still write something, that he's not just churning out the next chapter and this mainstream thing that he's been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it's been. So I know that's like a weird thing to like be him throwing a snowball and hitting the tree and saying I've still got it. It's got meaning, but it does actually. It's way more. It's not about the snowball.
Yeah. No, totally. It's like a nice. This whole thing is like a nice little character moment.
Yeah. But of course he flips the car in the blizzard, and Annie Wilkes takes him in, and I think what surprised me watching it again is just how quickly she actually comes across as dangerous, because she's like, oh hey, I'm your number one fan, which by the way, just saying that is kind of cringeworthy, to be honest. I can't imagine saying to anyone, I'm your number one fan. What? Shut up.
I've met like plenty of like comic book writers and stuff that I really admire, but like I'll always say like, oh, like I'm a huge fan, like I really love your stuff, but like to the idea of being like, oh no, like I like it does feel like you're already putting a sense of like entitlement and attachment to something that's not yours. That it is like a little cringy.
Because she says that it's not an accident she found him. She was kind of following because she knows where he writes his book. So she would sit outside in her car and look up at the light in the window and imagine what was being written. And I'm like, okay, alarm bells are already going off. She's already and obviously he's in this position where he's vulnerable, and she's claiming that the roads are closed and the phones aren't working because of the storm. And it's like, oh well, I'm stuck here now. But I mean, otherwise she seems nice enough for a little while, right? Obviously the little hints and stuff start to come in as we go. Just little reactions she has to things. She asks if she can read his new book, which just the manuscript is just sitting in his little satchel, which we see like there's a quick flashback after he has after the car flips, where we see him talking to his agent about writing this new book, and how he had to kill off Misery in the new Misery book, which as we discover later is just about to come out in a couple of days. But she asked to read this book, and I think the first big warning sign is when she's like talking to him about having read the first 40 pages or whatever. She's like feeding him soup, and she's like, oh, I've been reading the new book, and can we talk about the profanity in it? And it's clearly like right away this sets up the idea that he's written something that's not really for fans of Misery. This is something that he's doing that's very different. It's essentially he's doing like a mature R-rated like gritty thing, seemingly, versus his mainstream appeal. Even though everything we see about Misery makes it look like some sort of period piece romance series.
What I always got from it is that it did seem like those kind of like almost like kind of trashy like paperback romance novels. Which what's kind of funny is in the actual book, you actually do read like sections of like different stories. Like I think you do get to read a little bit of the book he's working on, which I want to say is called like Fast Cars or something like that. I do think it is like there's some element about cars to it, I believe. unless I'm just completely mistaken.
Wait, so in the book, it's not a misery character? It's not like a period piece?
Oh no, no, I mean, in the new one that he's writing, the manuscript. Not the,
okay, sorry, not the misery books. Okay, sorry.
yeah, but then you also do read some of the misery books as well, which those are like a period piece.
I was confused for a second. I was like, how did fast cars factor into this period piece romance? Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, like this is where the first hints, because she gets kind of like mad at the profanity, and he's kind of like sitting there like just like, jeez, woman's a bit crazy. Maybe I should watch what I'm saying, kind of thing.
And I feel like a lot of like these kind of people, like she's very like there's definitely something off about her, and like she's very like hypocritical, because I mean obviously like she's like so against like swearing and profanity, but then we'll see like later on in the movie that like when she gets like frustrated enough that she'll like let loose like whatever like swear words she wants.
That's it. She's got like a sort of fake one that she says a couple of times.
I think she says like cock-a-doodie.
Yeah,
like,
cock-a-doodie, yeah. When she gets really upset at one point. Well, because I think one of my favourite little moments of performance actually is when it's either when she's just bought the new Misery book, or where she's just about to go get it because it's coming out. She says like, I can't wait to see like what the next chapter is or whatever. There's a look in his face where I think you can tell in his, because we know that he kills off Misery in the new book, but there's a moment on his face where you can kind of see that he's suddenly realized that, wait a minute, she's about to read the new book where I kill off her favorite character.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, and he has this look of concern in his face, and it's actually, and obviously it pays off, because when she mentions that she's almost finished it, that's when we get the big scene, and this is maybe like a third, maybe nearly halfway, I'm not sure. But
sure.
Where she comes in the middle of the night or whatever, and she's like, I can't believe you did that. Why, you killed her, and gets very, and she even admits at that point that oh no, the phones have been working, the road's not closed, I lied about all of it, no one's looking for you.
And I think she specifically said, like, calls her my misery too, like, you killed my misery.
Yeah. And this is where I was joking earlier about how if you imagine this is Last Jedi, they're talking about,
sure.
And this is Rian Johnson. Like I could just like someone's like, "Oh, what did you do to Luke Skywalker?" To the point where, because I mean, if you remember, one of the things is people were actually campaigning for them to remake that Star Wars movie.
Jesus.
And this movie literally has her force him to write a new book that retcons well, I shouldn't say retcons, because she's actually very against retcons, as we come to learn.
Actually, I really like that scene where it's like, again, it's another such like bullshit like fan thing where it's like, I want you to rewrite this, and then he does it, but then it's like not good enough to her standards. Like she's like, yeah, it feels kind of like a cheat, like it's like they can't, like, all right, hey, I'm giving you what you want, and then like, yeah, but it's not good enough.
I mean, I do actually kind of share her distaste of like,
oh no, I agree,
the retconny thing where it's like, oh, this was what really is. Like, no, that's because of the thing, fans don't need to force this. TV shows and movies do this all the time, where they decide they want to change something, so they'll sort of try and say, oh, this happened just before this other thing, and it's like, no, it didn't. You're messing with it. But that's where she gets really upset, and talks about how the retcons, and he's sitting there because I do like his reactions every time. Like when she brings home the little table and she's like, I brought you a typewriter, and the N key doesn't work, which is what so I got a good deal. And so if you pay attention later on when you're looking at him typing stuff, the N is missing from all the words that should have N in it. It says the 8 for night and things like that. Like you can see it missing. And
one of the things that's cool in the book is like when you are reading like those bits of the book, like they do keep that, and then I think eventually in the movie too, she starts working with him where she like actually like puts the N in like herself with like a pen, and then like you see that in the book too, which is cool.
So no, that stuff was like, I mean, that's kind of the main plot of the movie is the progression of her wanting him to write this new book. But the other thing, of course, before she does this, is that she makes him burn the book that he'd just written. Like this is awful, this is evil, it can't exist in the world, you have to like expunge it, this will be good for you, and she makes him burn this book. And it's this idea that like not only are the fan base, you know, and the metaphor here, like forcing him to keep with this thing that he no longer feels like he gets anything out of, and he doesn't feel passion for. They're actively like saying, no, you can't do anything else either. You have to do only what we want you to do. It has to be this and this alone. And so he has to burn it, and he tries to convince her that it's not the only copy, so it doesn't mean anything. But we know it is. She knows it is because she's a stalker who's done her research, and he has to burn it, like, and, you know.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that's like interesting about her character too is like when she's all like, you know, like happy and giddy like a fan, like it does seem like you think like, oh, you know, she's just like a rube that you could probably easily trick and stuff. But then there are these scenes where it's like, oh no, she's like, you know, she's like way like smarter than she's like letting on, when she's like, you know, just very like cold and calculating and being like, no, we both know this is the only copy. Like, you don't have to like,
I mean,
you know.
More specific than that, she seems smart in the sense that she's always like ready to like catch him in a lie. And I feel like this is what you see on Twitter. You see people like, anytime someone like tries to explain something, and often this will be incorrectly done, but you'll have someone who'll say, nah, but what about this? And they'll think they've got them. And clearly, I mean, most often than not, it's just like it's people who lack the nuance to see, like, not every, you know, like, just because someone says they'll do a thing in this example doesn't mean that that's always the right thing to do. So they try to like catch someone out by saying, oh, well, you said this about this. Well, yeah, but different context, different setup, whatever. But I feel like you see this type of thing online where they're ready to catch you out, and they're ready to say, hey, but you said this, or blah blah blah, or this or that, and they'll have something. And I felt like I got that a lot from this character. It's kind of weirdly ahead of its time, even though the funny thing is, though, the ironic thing is that if this was set any later, then a lot of the plot wouldn't work, because, you know, this movie relies upon the fact that he doesn't have any kind of like cell phone. And admittedly, sure, like in a modern version, you just have her, you know, say, oh, that gets smashed in the crash, there's no cell phone.
Yeah.
But then there'd be like, you know, so but then he'd say, okay, can I use your phone? And she'd be like, oh well, unfortunately, like, what would her excuse be for not having a cell phone? That'd be kind of a weird thing in a modern, you know, setting, for example.
Yeah.
And this is not me pointing out. I'm just saying that so much of this plot is you know, even the idea that, like, how little contact this writer seems to have with his agent and his family when he's off writing a book. That wouldn't be the case now. He would probably call them on his cell phone. He would probably do these things. The idea of the internet for research, or even the idea that there's only one copy, I get why it is in the context of the movie, but these days, every writer would be storing things in the cloud. You know, everyone would, you know, they'd have backups, because the thought of losing what you've worked on would be, you know, horrendous. And okay, sure, there's probably a couple of old school writers who still type in a typewriter. I'm sure there is, but very rarely now, I'd say. So it's just interesting to think about how this is one of these movie plots which would be affected heavily if you set it in a present day setting. You'd have to write around so much to get it to work. So that's interesting.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's you know, it's kind of funny. I mean, it's a little out of context, but did you ever end up watching the second season of Castle Rock?
I never did. I did chuckle though, because when the movie started and the Castle Rock Entertainment thing came up,
I
was like, oh yeah, that's right, yeah, Castle Rock. That's the whole thing.
Just like one of the things that's just like I really didn't like about it is they have I forget the actress that's playing Annie Wilkes in it. It's a very good actress. Like, she's from like Party Down and stuff. The name escapes me, but she does like a really good Annie Wilkes, but she does so much in like the second season of Castle Rock that it just like feels really weird, because I think it's like technically supposed to take place before Misery. So I don't know. It's just one of those annoying things where it's like, oh wow, like this character had a pretty crazy life before like this movie started.
Oh yeah, Lizzie Kaplan. Actually,
Lizzie Kaplan, that's it. Yeah,
that's the. If I'm going to critique the movie, like I said, the end's a bit lackluster. One of the things I don't like about the movie, and the story, is I'm not really a big fan of like her having this like dark past where she was like, you know, this maternity ward nurse who and these kids were dying. Like, I don't need her to have like some dark like past that sort of says, oh, she's always been a crazy person, because I just don't think it needs it. Like, I feel like, you know, she's just like, you know, we don't really need to know that she's been crazy before, or that she's, you know, she's killed people before or anything like that. I feel like this story works independently of whatever her past is. Like, getting a sense of her personality is fine. Like, seeing, you know, the sort of things she keeps around, a little shrine for the books, and then she watches like crap TV at night, you know, on her own. Like, that stuff's fine, but like, I don't necessarily need her to have this dark past.
I kind of like when it was more like you were getting like little bits and pieces from some of the stuff she said. Like at one point, I think she says something like, "Oh yeah, sometimes my mind gets a little cloudy. That's why I couldn't remember much on the stand, like at trial or whatever." Like I like little stuff like that more than like just going through a book and seeing like these clippings.
The scrapbook, him looking through that scrapbook is like maybe my least favorite scene of the whole movie, because I'm like, we don't need this. Like we get her from context. I just
yeah, like I don't think it necessarily. I wouldn't say it bothers me, but yeah, I would agree that it's like definitely unnecessary.
Yeah. So no, I just on the scene where he burns his own book. When she makes him do that, the manuscript. I love that. Him looking as the embers of just the little bits of paper that are like floating around the room. Like there's a wonderful visual of that in a movie that can't have a lot of over the top visuals because it's all set in a bedroom basically. That moment really stands out as visually having something in there.
Totally.
But you do see that because the camera work is very, you know, it's doing kind of what you expect it to. But there are moments like when she does go on the rant about retconning in the serials that she used to go watch, and the camera kind of like sort of like very aggressively starts to track into her, and it's very like low angled, and she's like, you know, that's not what happened in the Cockadooey movie last week, or whatever she says at the end of the scene. When it cuts back to James Caan, you feel the more natural framing on him, because it's so like animated on her, the way it's low angled and looking up at her, the way it's sort of went, and it's very in her face, and it's very kind of uncomfortable. So when it cuts back to him and it's just sort of a normal close up of his face, just sort of, I mean, he looks scared of her, he looks unnerved, but the actual shot is much more normal and like level headed, for that, you know, for just a sort of on the nose term. The camera work does a really good job of making her feel more, you know, more unhinged than he is, even though obviously he is, but or well, obviously she is rather, between the two, but it does a really good job of giving them different feelings, just even in how they're presented on top of the performance. So the direction's very good. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Totally.
I can't fault it. So she makes him write the new book. Throws out the first like attempt that he makes it a chapter because of the retcon, and he keeps working away. You know, we mentioned the survival stuff earlier. Throughout all this, you know, he's been trying. He makes a go for better paper, so that he can like use the little bobby pin that he's found to get out of his room, which has been locked. And he thinks he's found a phone, but it's just a fake. It's just she's got a decoy phone sitting in her front room. Presumably her real phone's upstairs, I guess, if she has one.
I thought it was a real phone, but she just like took like everything out, like that was inside of it, like all the
it was,
you know, whatever that would make it work.
Yeah, I never really thought about it, but I guess like, did she intentionally do that just in case he got out of his room? Is that the implication?
That was my guess. Yeah.
And he's trying to get into the kitchen, and probably one of my favorite scenes of tension is when she's on her way back and he can hear the car coming, and because he's had to like climb out of his chair at this point because the chair wouldn't fit into the kitchen because he's trying to get out the back door. Him getting back into the chair, getting back to the room, locking the door again, and just because she knows when she comes in how sweaty he is. Like, I thought that scene was really well done, really tense. His plan from here on, because he does get out again when he sees the scrapbook and all that, but she's actually caught that he's been out because he's, you know, the little penguin that he knocked over, like he sat it back up the wrong way, and she you know, the scene you were talking about earlier, the big scene that everyone remembers from this one is the hobbling scene. Where basically, because at this point, you know, it's been a few weeks at least, it's not as snowy, you know, it's been raining. Basically, he's actually starting to get more fit, he's starting to be stronger, he's been exercising with a typewriter. We see him like lifting it up and down to like keep his arms exercised, because he's not got a lot of options obviously. he's getting healthier, and she knows that. So this is basically an excuse to keep him trapped for longer. So she puts a block of wood between his feet, and she hits his feet with a sledgehammer, so that he has been, he's back in the wheelchair for a while now. Like, that's him again.
And what's funny about the scene is, like, I do feel like it sticks out in your mind as being like so gruesome, but you really don't see much. Like,
you see the first hit you see, but the second one you don't see at all.
But I think just the, like, it so gets into your head, like, placing the block between the feet, taking out the sledgehammer, that I feel like it's one of those scenes where it's not showing you much, but you know what's gonna happen, and like your brain fills so much in that it's like, even though it's like a quick, like, short thing you don't see that much, I feel like it's so memorable and stands out. And honestly, a good change from the book, because in the book she just I believe she just like cuts his feet off with an axe, basically, which
that's a bit extreme. Yeah, no hopes of recovering from that.
Yeah.
So no, that's interesting. I mean, I think what I like about this scene as well is that he kind of begs for her not to, because he's not sure what she's going to do. And he's like, whatever you're thinking of doing, please don't do it. And I think those genuine moments from him where he's actually just completely scared. Obviously, he's scared a lot in the movie, and it's not like he's hiding that. It's not some bullshit machismo thing where he's like trying to like not be. But he's so cocky, not cocky. He's so.
He's like a very smart character. So like, there's a lot of times where, which I think is one of the reasons why the performance is so great. Like, you get this sense that he is scared, but he's not showing it to her. So like, there is a lot of pretending that he's doing, where it's like,
I think what I was trying to say though, he uses a lot of sarcasm. He uses a lot of he's very witty, and you get that he's scared, and you get that he's hiding it, but it's not like he's hiding it in like I'm too ashamed to show that I'm scared. It's not like a bullshit machismo thing. It's more like he's trying to keep his guard up with her to sort of like, I don't know, just try and navigate, because it clearly she can like flip on she can switch to being dangerous very quickly. So he's trying to like play along, and he's trying to do these things. But this moment where he sort of like pleads for her not to do whatever he's doing, it feels like he's just genuinely scared, and he's begging, and it feels very different from how strong-willed he is for the rest of the movie. As I would say. But he's got this plan. He's been collecting. He stops taking the pills. Once he realizes she's kind of off hinge, he stops taking the pills and he's hiding them. And he essentially tries to make it a little concoction of all the pills. He opens them all up and pours all the the raw ingredients, I guess, or the actual crushed pills from the capsules into a little like paper cup that he's made. And he comes up with the whole thing where he asks her to have dinner with him the day he's going to finish the book, and the whole plan is to pour this overdose of whatever these pills are, because he doesn't even know. He's just like, he has no idea what she's been giving him, and so he pours it into her wine, and he's playing along, pretending to be happy to have her go along with all this. And I think I do kind of love that it's not that she figures him out. She doesn't figure out that he's trying something here. She just knocks over the wine glass by accident and has to pour herself a new. And the crushing disappointment on his face when she's just accidentally avoided his trap for him to like make his great escape is just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
And it's like you said before, like he can't let on that he's like, like disappointed. Like, so it is like this great mix of like, you can like see in his eyes that he is just devastated, that this was like his big hope of like how he's gonna escape. And then it's just like his dreams are just crushed, but he can't really like let on too much, so he's just like kind of smiling, and it's like, oh, and again, like you're so invested like with him and been following this plan like closely that it does feel devastating when it happens.
Yeah, and I think if you're going with what you said at the start about this maybe originally being more about his addiction, the idea that he puts in all this effort to be sober for a long time, and then just like that he can be off the wagon. True, yeah. I wasn't thinking about it as I was watching it, just because you said that though at the start. This idea that all this effort that he's been putting in for weeks or whatever it's been, that he's been collecting all these pills, just like that, it's gone. It's just done.
Yeah.
And obviously the subplot, which we kind of I briefly mentioned earlier, but the sheriff who, you know, obviously the agent calls the sheriff. Eventually they find the car. And I think it's very smart that it makes us like the sheriff, because him and his wife have a really good relationship where they're kind of, you know, they're sort of like have like a happy bickering kind of thing going, where like she's kind of like sniping at him, and he's talking about, oh, that's what gives our, you know, marriage such energy in life, is just how snipey you are with me. But like, he's a smart guy, you know.
Yeah, the one scene I like is when they're driving and like she puts her hand on his knee and he puts it back and he's like, "Hey, when you're in this car, you're not my wife. You're my like deputy or whatever." Yeah. But yeah, like they're very cute, and it's like and again, I like that he is like a very competent sheriff, but it is also like, you know, this is a very small town. Like you get the feeling that like not a lot goes on here, so they're probably like not used to like, you know, like big important investigations and stuff. So I like that. Yeah, he's like, you know, it's not like he's portrayed as like being dumb or anything, but
no,
it's like
his wife's first line of dialogue, I think, is that when she sees, oh, there's a phone call, must be a busy morning. Like, you know, that's the attitude here because of how quiet the town is. No, because he's the one, because basically the you know, the state troopers or whoever they are, like they basically say, oh, he must be dead because he, you know, nothing could have survived out here. But he's looking at the car door and sees that it was pried open, so someone else was there. He's just suspicious, and he eventually, you know, he sees Annie Wilkes, like, you know, yelling in the street, and he starts to like suspect that maybe there's something there, especially when the shop owner says, "No, she always comes in and buys all of his new books," and he goes out there. So all of this is designed, and obviously I remembered what happened to him from the first time I watched it, just because it's pretty memorable. But you know, he does go out to the house. In fact, one of my favorite little moments of this whole thing is when Paul sees the car coming. He has like a brief moment of hope, but immediately, you know, Annie walks in the room with a syringe to like, you know, knock him out, and it's like, no, she's immediately going to like make sure he can't yell for help, and she dumps him in the basement, and we have this scene of the sheriff like walking around, being friendly, you know, being pleasant with her, walking around the house, trying to see if he can find anything, and it's just that obviously once he leaves, Paul's able to make enough noise in the basement because he's just starting to wake up, and he knocks over the barbecue or whatever it is. And he comes back in and he finds him, and just as he sees him and says, "Hey, you're Paul, the writer," the shotgun blast comes through the chest and he's dead. And it's kind of heartbreaking, and it feels like once again Paul's hope of being saved, of figuring this out, is once again dashed, and it feels really helpless. And then the whole point of the movie is just to make him feel helpless and more helpless and more helpless, and your hope is just taken away over and over again. And he has to fight out of himself. And again, I think that's where you talking about this being about Stephen King's addiction comes back into it, this idea that he has to do it himself. He can't like rely on someone else. It's, you know, it's this struggle. It feels helpless, but ultimately he has to fight through it himself by the end. Obviously, there's a tease earlier, you know, gradually throughout the movie in the last sort of third, where she might be, you know, homicidal / suicidal, where she's maybe willing to kill both herself and him once he's finished the book. Kind of thing. He knows he's on this ticking time bomb. And again, going to the idea of the addiction, the idea that, you know, like his alcoholism or his other addictions might kill him ultimately. You know, you can see where the metaphor of that comes into it. And it's definitely there. Where I find the ending a little, because it makes sense again with the metaphor of the addiction, it does make some amount of sense. I do find the ending a little underwhelming though, just because essentially, you know, he's about to finish the book, and you know, he asks for his wine and his match and whatever, and his plan is to sort of burn the book in front of her as a last kind of ditch effort to sort of make her go crazy. And he's obviously feeling a bit stronger here, you know, outside of his feet, obviously, because of what happened. And it's this big moment where he burns it in front of her and says, "No, I'm taking ownership of this and I'm burning it." And I do think it's a little unsatisfying that essentially the actual confrontation at the end is just kind of like a struggling fighting match between them, where they're just kind of like, you know, strangling each other and he's fighting back. It doesn't really feel like he does anything that, like, I don't know, like he couldn't have attempted, you know, like an hour ago in the movie. You know, once he had some strength back in his arms, like, it doesn't feel like anything. I guess the idea is that he's like, now he's so impassionate and he's given up all hope of anything else that he has to like just put all of his energy into just fighting. But it's not as, I don't know, like, there's so much like teasing throughout the movie of how he's eventually going to outsmart her, or how eventually someone else is going to find him, that there's something a little unsatisfying to me of it just being just this struggle of where he eventually
Sure.
bashes her to death. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think part of it, and I mean, maybe you get, maybe this is one thing that the book does maybe a little better than the movie is this idea of, like, you know, he gets to a point where he does actually want to write this book, and like it's like she's taken so much from him, like she's, you know, burned his book, that he wants this revenge. Like he wants to see the look in her eyes when he takes away like the only thing that she loved. You know, like burning this book in front of her is like, you know, I think it gets to a point where it's not so much like about escape and who knows if he'll even be able to make it, but at least he knows that he can like take this thing that she wants so badly away from him, like the way that she's taken, you know, everything away from him. So I think that's part of it. And then like I get what you mean though, that it's like I think that is like a good idea, but then yeah, it does kind of just end up devolving into like a little bit of a struggle match between them.
Yeah, it's a struggle match where, you know, he eventually just hits her enough times in the head to kill her. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, the idea of like her as serving as inspiration is still in the movie, because at the end of the movie, like, the agent's kind of like, hey, like, what about, you know, like he says to her that, you know, in a way, that horrible experience actually like gave him like a lot of things to like write about, a lot of, you know, not the literal events, because she even says, hey, do you want to write a non-fiction book about what happened? And he's like, I mean, that's a bit exploitive. But the idea that as a writer, like going through this experience gave him a lot of fear, a lot of like, you know, inspiration that where he could put into his characters, and, you know, give him something that he could write about passionately. So in a weird way, and I think going with the addiction idea that this is about Stephen King's addiction is that, yeah, all that turmoil he went through, going through all that, did give him a lot of things to write about, and like characters to write about, and how they're going through things, and so on and so on. Like those bad experiences give people things to talk about. It gives people things to, you know, believe in, or believe that are important to write about. So,
and
that's still in there.
Yeah, and I believe in the book as well, he does actually end up saving. I think he burns like a fake copy or like stack of papers, and then actually does keep the misery book and publishes it at the end of the book. But I could be wrong about that. Someone can correct me, but I think that's what happens.
Yeah, because again, he's going along with it. He's like saying, "Hey, we'll need 2 glasses this time for the for the wine and so on." Yeah, no, I mean, I think thematically, especially when you're looking at it from the addiction point of view that you've brought into this, I think it is there, and the idea of the fandom stuff. I think the fandom stuff that we're sort of prescribing to it, because we're coming at this from like a 2020 world where this is become such a thing, is maybe something that the ending doesn't lend itself to as much. Maybe once we get to the point where he's kind of taking control of his creation back and burned the book, that's kind of where that theme kind of ends. Because I don't think the whole idea of him of like a creator being inspired by the hate they get is something that really weird, doesn't really work. That part of it doesn't fit the metaphor. But that's okay, because it's not, because like you say, the movie was actually about his own addiction problems than it was about that. It's just that so much of this has become relevant in different ways because of you know. Not that toxic fandom didn't always exist, because it did, but it's definitely it's got like a voice now. It's got like a conduit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is back in the day, like most of the creators probably didn't like people didn't have immediate access to the creators they like. Like, you know, you could always write letters to people if they had like addresses for like the movie studio or a book company or whatever they worked for, but I mean, I'm sure half the time they probably didn't even see the letters, or their agents probably didn't show it to them, so it's like, it's probably like less invasive and, not as much of a thing that's like in your face when you're a creator back then.
Yeah. But, so, I mean, yeah, so if I have my two sort of bigger things that hold the movie back a little bit for me, would be Annie's dark past. I didn't need the scrapbook and sort of the discovery of that stuff. And I didn't, I think the ending could have been, if not more clever, then certainly I think the struggle of actually having to fight her being tough might have been sold better if he was actually still a bit weaker. I don't know, like the idea that he had to push himself to do it, because I think maybe my ultimate problem with it is it just feels like a sort of by the numbers movie struggling between two people scene. where it doesn't feel like he's I guess it doesn't feel like he's like, oh, he's at this breaking point now where he's been driven to just fight back like this. It doesn't really build up to it in that way, I don't think. Even though in theory it should feel that way. I think that one sort of little snippet of it's missing there at the ending. But I do think it's a little bit weird that it just sort of like after she's like lying there dead. Like I really think the catharsis of seeing him get to a telephone and call for help and having like just seeing a glimpse of someone arriving to help him would have felt really nice. It just kind of like fades to black and says 18 months later and he's walking in the city and I'm like, oh, that's a bit odd. I would have liked to have seen just because so much of the movie is about him trying to get to a phone or trying to get to a door. Like I would have liked to have seen just him achieve that after her death. Just give me the happiness, damn it.
Yeah. No, yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't think it's it doesn't bother me as much, but yeah, there's probably like a little bit more they could have done, like with that last fight scene, or like there's some stuff like I do like the burning pages, and like I do like it gets like a little like I don't know, like gruesome with like like shoving them in her mouth and stuff, but like they I maybe could have gone like a little bit more with it. But yeah, I wouldn't say though. I mean, so much of like the rest of the movie though is so good and intense that it's like it's like minor quibbles. It doesn't really take too much away from it for me.
No, it doesn't ruin the movie by any means. It's just kind of a ho hum ending after a really solid movie. So it's as what it is. And in the final scene, of course, he sees Kathy Bates walking towards him in the restaurant, and he's not scared by it. He sort of recognizes it, and this movie goes along with the addiction metaphor again, is the idea that it's always kind of there, it's always kind of prevalent and possibly coming back, and he has to accept that and just kind of live with it and move on from it and learn from it. And it ends with the waitress who he did see as Kathy Bates first, saying she's the #1 fan, and he just kind of smiles and. Again, the idea that it's always going to be there, and I guess that works in a present day context if we're talking about the fandom metaphor, where
for sure,
yes, those toxic fans are always going to be there. You're always going to have those naysayers. You're always going to have those people who feel entitled. You're always going to have those elements, and you kind of have to learn to live with it, and probably mute your Twitter or delete your Twitter or whatever the other examples might be. But they do exist, and you have to kind of just accept it and move on with your life, I guess, and struggle in spite of it. So, yeah, that is kind of misery. So, I think it is interesting that it can be looked at from those two very different aspects, and both of them work quite well for probably 90% of the story, either one. So, yeah,
no, I think there's like definitely a lot of layers to it, and like even if you're not like looking at the metaphor or whatever, I think it is just an entertaining, like suspenseful movie with some like great performances and everything. So that stuff is just like some nice like little topping when you add those layers to it.
Little topping. The subtext is just the topping to Tim.
Topping.
Yes. No, for me it adds a lot to the movie, that stuff. But you're right, it's just kind of a nice suspenseful kind of thriller type of movie. So, okay. Well, with that said, Tim, what are you rating Misery?
I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen it at this point. It's not like one I watch like all the time, but I've definitely seen it my fair amount, and it's always entertaining. Again, great premise, and like we said, there's definitely like a lot of like eerie modern day fandom stuff that you can really like apply here, which makes it even more interesting. And I just think this is definitely one of the better King adaptations, which I love King, but doesn't always get the best best movies, but no, I think it's great. It is not perfect, so I can't give it a 10 out of 10, but I am going to go pretty high and give it a 9, actually. I think it's really, really well done.
I'm not going that high. I'm going to give it a solid 8. I think it's a very good movie, and anchored by a lot of the qualities we talked about: the acting, the directing, the subtext, which comes from I never even thought of the addiction angle. That was something you brought to this. Just from your King fandom.
Yeah, honestly, I would never have really thought of that on my own. I just know it from I think like other King podcasts I've heard people talk about it, or King talk about it in interviews or whatever. So I mean, yeah,
but it is there, because once you said that, and I started thinking about a lot of the events in the movie and what they mean for the character, it is there. Like taking Annie Wilkes and the character that he created as his addiction, and sort of looking at the movie through that lens, it all works. But so does looking at it through the lens of toxic fandom, and maybe that's a bit more on the surface. It probably feels more on the surface now than it did then, just because of the world we live in, and because we are so used to that side of things now, and we see examples of it all the time. But both of them work there, and they both work at the same time. They don't necessarily work in the same way, because if you look at Misery as his drug, I mean, that doesn't necessarily quite work. The two metaphors both work independently. They don't necessarily work when you mix them together, because like if Misery is his drug, then it can't also be the toxic fandom at the same time, because that wouldn't be something that you're addicted to, would it? So they both work independently, but they both work very well, and they're both there. 8 out of 10 for me. So there you go. That is Misery. If you have gotten to this part of the review on YouTube, please put in the comments that you're our #1 fan. You can do that in the comments. I'm going to make Tim do the pose for the thumbnail, so here we go. 3, 2, 1, pose. That's how Tim looks at me before we start recording every day. I just want everyone to know that. So that is that is Misery. By all means, though, in the comments, let us know what you think of the movie, and if you read the book too, why not? You can please do a like. Liking is super important. It's a nice free way to support us and keep all the content coming. But you can also support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, as we mentioned earlier. Get us on Twitter at ScreamsMidnight for updates and other such shenanigans and all that jazz. But that is us. So that's basically the review. So thank you once again for watching or listening. Hopefully this is not being an example of misery for everyone listening, I would hope.
Sure.
Nothing like the crushing silence after a statement to fill us with the lack of, or the opposite of misery. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. It's a delirious day and a delirious year, where I mean 2020 we all feel like with James Caan in the bed, just
pretty much
hoping for eventual escape, but seemingly it's never coming. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching scary movies, guys, and we will see you next time.